Here is why you keep losing arguments even when you are right. You explain clearly, you bring receipts, you stay calm, and still nothing moves. The room goes quiet, your idea lands flat, and 5 minutes later, someone repeats it and gets credit. At work, this feels humiliating. At home, it feels lonely. And in friendships, it feels like betrayal. When you speak softly, you are labeled weak. When you speak firmly, you are labeled difficult. And either way, you lose influence. You start doubting yourself, not because you are wrong, but because reality keeps ignoring you. This is the hidden pain smart people carry. Being right does not move people. Being positioned does. Persuasion fails when you think it is about words. Think about a meeting where you offered a clear plan and no one reacted. Then a louder colleague framed the same idea and everyone nodded. Think about a relationship where you told the truth carefully and still lost the person. Not because you lied, but because timing and posture worked against you. This pattern is not random. It is predictable. Influence does not reward accuracy, it rewards alignment. People do not resist logic, they resist pressure. When you push, they brace. When you explain, they defend. And when you argue, they dig in. That is why trying harder makes you weaker. This video starts where that frustration lives. Before techniques, before tactics, before labels. We will name the mistake that drains your power and show a cleaner way to move people without raising your voice or selling your soul. You are not broken, and you are not lacking confidence. You are misusing leverage. The mistake is assuming fairness governs influence when context does. Control the frame and resistance drops. Ignore the frame and resistance hardens. The fix is not louder speech or better facts. It is changing when you speak, how you enter, and what you make easy to accept. This shift feels subtle, but it decides who gets followed and who gets dismissed every single day in meetings, homes, friendships, and careers. Most people will skip this. If you do not, comment, "I am still listening." Now that you can see why being right keeps failing you, it is time to expose the illusion that keeps you trapped. Most people believe persuasion is about speaking louder, talking longer, or winning the argument in front of witnesses. They think volume equals authority, repetition equals dominance, and debate equals change. That belief feels logical, but it quietly destroys influence. Every time you raise your voice, the other person raises their defenses. Every time you pile on reasons, their ego starts guarding the door. Pressure creates resistance, not agreement. This is why arguments harden people instead of moving them. You are not fighting ignorance, you are fighting identity. When someone feels pushed, they stop listening and start protecting who they think they are. That is why even perfect logic slides off. When you push beliefs, they don't bend, they lock. Think about a couple arguing at night, both convinced they are right, both talking more, both getting farther apart. Or picture a manager lecturing an employee with facts and data, only to watch motivation disappear the moment the meeting ends. The mistake is assuming persuasion happens at the level of words. It does not. It happens at the level of safety, status, and control. Arguments feel productive because they feel active, but activity is not progress. Winning a debate often costs you the outcome you actually wanted. Influence dies the moment someone feels cornered. To change behavior, you must first remove the feeling of threat. This is the shift. To understand why pressure fails, you need a different lens. And this is where Machiavelli enters. He was not interested in debates, moral victories, or sounding right in public. He studied how behavior actually moves when power is present. His insight was simple and uncomfortable. Real power does not persuade by force, it guides by design. It does not argue, it arranges. Near high-level influence works before words are spoken, by shaping context, incentives, and timing so resistance never needs to appear. The most effective control is invisible. If people feel pushed, you have already lost. This is not about manipulation or becoming cold. It is about stopping the habit of weakening yourself by meeting every disagreement head-on. Machiavelli understood that confrontation creates enemies, while structure creates compliance without conflict. When the environment makes the desired action feel natural, people move on their own and still believe it was their choice. That is the kind of influence that lasts. The goal of this video is not to turn you into someone you dislike. It is to help you stop bleeding authority in conversations, meetings, and relationships by learning how to lead behavior without triggering defense, ego, or fear. What comes next is where understanding turns into leverage. If power works by guiding behavior instead of forcing agreement, then persuasion becomes a matter of structure, not personality. That idea can feel abstract, so let's make it usable. The next 7 principles translate this lens into actions you can apply in meetings, conversations, and relationships without becoming louder or colder. Each one removes friction, lowers resistance, and shifts outcomes quietly, starting with how you show up before you ever speak. And this is Law 1. Power rarely announces itself. It waits, then speaks once. You think the problem is that you are not forceful enough, not confident enough, not visible enough. So you compensate by talking more. You explain every detail, defend every point, and fill every silence because silence feels like losing. That instinct is understandable, but it quietly signals weakness. In real power dynamics, the person who speaks the most is usually the one trying to earn space, not the one who owns it. Volume is compensation. Silence signals position. Watch a typical meeting and you will see it clearly. The person with the least authority rushes to prove value, interrupts to stay relevant, and keeps talking even when the room has already decided. Meanwhile, the person everyone waits for often says nothing at first. They listen or let others expose their thinking and enter late when the frame is already set. That timing changes everything. This is not introversion or extroversion. It is control of rhythm. Power is not about dominating airtime. It is about deciding when momentum shifts. Think about a senior leader who sits quietly while others debate, then offers one sentence that closes the discussion, or a manager who pauses instead of answering immediately, forcing the team to think harder and reveal their assumptions. Silence creates gravity. It makes people lean in. Talking nonstop does the opposite. It makes people tune out and look for exits. This is why trying to sound strong often makes you easier to ignore. When you talk too much, you remove mystery, lower perceived status, and invite interruption. When you speak less, but with intention, you change the tempo of the interaction. This principle is uncomfortable because it requires restraint. It asks you to tolerate short-term anxiety instead of chasing instant validation. But once you stop filling space, you start shaping it. And that sets up the next principle. Because knowing when not to speak is only half the game, what matters next is how you make others move without saying much at all. People misread this as being passive, but it is strategic patience. You are not disappearing. You are letting noise collapse on itself. The longer others talk, the more patterns they reveal, and the easier it becomes to intervene with precision instead of force. That restraint is rare, uncomfortable, and exactly why it separates people who react from people who quietly decide outcomes. This is where influence actually begins for you. Law 2. Being correct is not the same as being followed. Building on silence, the next mistake is believing truth alone should be enough. You explain clearly, show logic, and still watch people resist, delay, or quietly do the opposite. That experience feels insulting because you did your part. But the human brain is not searching for truth in moments of decision. It is searching for a reason that makes action feel safe. People obey reasons, not facts. A weak reason beats a strong truth. This is why adding because changes outcomes even when the reason is obvious or imperfect. The word gives the mind permission. Think about asking a coworker for help. Saying I need this done today feels like pressure. Saying I need this done today because the client moved the deadline gives them something to lean on. The task stays the same, but resistance drops. The same pattern shows up at home. Telling your partner we should save money invites debate. Saying we should save money because we want less stress next year shifts the frame from control to relief. Even leadership works this way. A manager who assigns work without context triggers quiet resentment. One who explains why the task matters creates cooperation without force. This is not about lying or dressing up weak ideas. It is about understanding that facts threaten identity, while reasons offer cover. When people feel justified, they move. When they feel exposed, they push back. That is why flooding someone with data rarely persuades them. Data feels like a courtroom, not a bridge. Reasons feel human. They reduce friction by answering the unspoken question, why is this safe for me? Once you grasp this, persuasion stops feeling like combat and starts feeling like alignment. You are no longer trying to win belief. You are removing fear. And that sets up the next shift. Because reasons work best when people believe others like them are already moving the same way. This shows up in sales calls, family arguments, and everyday requests where the outcome matters more than being right. People follow paths that protect their self-image, reputation, and sense of control. Give them a reason that preserves dignity and they cooperate. Take that away and even small requests feel like threats. This principle decides who gets support, approval, and momentum in environments that quietly reward compliance without public conflict or backlash. Comment I see why now if this explains your past failures. Law 3. Truth doesn't travel alone. It travels with witnesses. Once reasons remove resistance, the next force takes over quietly. The crowd. You do the right thing, you speak carefully, and still feel isolated while everyone else moves together without you. That loneliness hurts because it makes you question your judgment, not your courage. The truth is uncomfortable. People rarely decide in isolation. They scan the room first. They look for people like them, similar rank, similar risk, similar identity, and they copy what feels safe. People don't ask, is this right? They ask, do people like me do this? That is why reviews matter more than descriptions. A restaurant with mediocre food and packed tables feels trustworthy, while a perfect menu and empty seats feels suspicious. At work, the same rule applies. An idea supported by 3 average voices travels faster than a brilliant idea carried alone. In meetings, people watch reactions before committing. In offices, behavior spreads horizontally, not logically. This is why being first feels dangerous. Early movers absorb the social risk so others can follow without exposure. Social media amplifies this instinct. Posts with engagement feel valuable before we even read them. Silence signals danger, activity signals permission. This does not mean truth is irrelevant. It means truth needs witnesses. If no one like me has gone first, my brain assumes there is a hidden cost. That is why persuasion fails when you stand alone trying to convince the group with logic. You are not fighting ignorance. You are fighting fear of isolation. Effective influence borrows safety from the collective, or it shows proof before it demands belief. It frames action as normal, expected, already happening. When people see others move, their resistance softens because responsibility dissolves. No one wants to be wrong alone. They would rather be wrong together. Understanding this changes how you lead, sell, and speak. You stop pushing uphill and start positioning downhill, letting social gravity do the work. The moment you realize influence flows through groups, not individuals, you stop asking how to convince and start asking who needs to go first. This realization often stings because it exposes why effort without allies feels invisible. Influence accelerates once one credible person moves publicly. Your task is not to persuade everyone, but to identify the right first follower. That transition matters because the next principle shows how to make action feel effortless once momentum exists, and resistance quietly collapses without further explanation required. Law 4. Truth without a future creates fear, not movement. When momentum is already in motion, truth becomes dangerous if you deliver it wrong. You offer feedback with good intentions and watch faces tighten, shoulders rise, and defenses click into place. You tell the truth carefully and still damage the relationship. Not because the truth was false, but because it landed without a future. Truth alone rarely motivates action. The feeling that follows truth does. This is why blunt honesty so often backfires. People can tolerate bad news if it points somewhere. They shut down when it traps them. Truth without direction creates paralysis. Think about a manager telling an employee their performance missed the mark, then stopping there. The message is accurate, but the emotional result is fear and withdrawal. Now imagine the same truth followed by a clear path forward and a believable upside. The body relaxes, attention returns, movement becomes possible. This is the power sequence. Truth, then direction, then hope. Hope is not optimism or cheerleading. It is a specific image of improvement that preserves dignity. In relationships, the pattern is the same. Saying this hurt me invites defense. Saying this hurt me, and here is how we can avoid it, next time keeps the bond intact. The truth stays sharp, but the landing is soft. This is not manipulation. It is emotional physics. Fear freezes. Direction steadies. Hope mobilizes. High-level influence never ends on exposure. It ends on agency. You reveal the problem, then immediately hand the other person a way to act without losing face. That is why leaders who start with the bad news but end with a plan feel trustworthy, while those who cushion endlessly feel evasive. The sequence matters more than the content. If you end on threat, people retreat. If you end on possibility, they lean forward. This principle explains why some honest people are avoided, while others are sought out for clarity. One leaves you feeling small. The other leaves you feeling capable. The difference is not kindness. It is structure. Delivering truth is easy. Delivering movement is the skill. Once you understand this, feedback stops being a weapon and becomes a lever. You stop burning bridges with accuracy and start building momentum with precision. And that prepares the ground for the next principle. Because once people feel safe and capable, the fastest way to move them is to make the next step feel lighter than standing still there. Law 5. Understanding isn't enough if nothing sticks. After people start feeling capable, another problem appears. your message still dies in their memory. You speak accurately, you explain the logic, and days later, no one recalls what you said. Your idea does not spread because the brain is not built to honor correctness. It is built to conserve energy. If it's hard to process, it's easy to reject. Fluency decides belief before truth even enters the room. Simple ideas feel safer, faster, and more trustworthy, even when they are incomplete. This is why slogans outperform reports and why a clear phrase beats a perfect argument. Now, think about how leaders actually move teams. A boss who says, "Please optimize cross-functional workflows," creates confusion. A boss who says, "Make it easier for customers to buy," creates motion. The second sentence travels because it is light. The same rule explains why certain phrases go viral while smarter ones disappear. Short, rhythmic language sticks because the brain can replay it without effort. Easy becomes familiar, familiar becomes true, and true becomes repeatable. That chain has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with cognitive comfort. You see this everywhere. Safety slogans rhyme, political lines repeat, sales scripts use symmetry. Even parents simplify rules because complexity invites resistance. Precision feels respectful, but heaviness feels risky. When your words demand effort, and people subconsciously step back. When your words feel smooth, they lean in. This is not about dumbing things down. It is about removing friction so meaning can travel farther than you. Influence that spreads is influence that survives retelling. If someone cannot repeat your point in one breath, it will not survive the room. This is why smart people often feel unheard. They mistake depth for density. The goal is not to impress, it is to transmit. Once you learn to package truth so it glides instead of grinds, you stop pushing ideas uphill. And that leads directly to the next principle. Because once a message is easy to accept, the final step is making the action itself feel just as easy. This matters because persuasion collapses when effort rises, and power grows when paths feel obvious. Ease is not laziness, it is strategic mercy. And once ease is designed into language, the next principle shows how to design it into behavior itself. That transition turns understanding into action, without friction, force, or fatigue, for anyone ready to move forward now. Law 6. Momentum dies the moment you start explaining. When language feels easy, the fastest way to lose momentum is to start explaining again. You offer solutions and they resist harder. The more you push clarity, the more they push back. Until the conversation becomes a tug of war, no one wins. This hurts because your intention is to help, not control. But explanation often feels like pressure to the other side. This is where power changes shape. Instead of speaking, you let them speak. Instead of leading, you let them step forward on their own. Questions do what statements cannot. They bypass defense and recruit the mind as an ally. The strongest arguments are the ones people make to themselves. In work settings, this looks subtle but decisive. A manager who says you need to prioritize better invites excuses. A manager who asks what is slowing this down invites ownership. In relationships, the difference is even clearer. Saying you should communicate more triggers blame. Asking what would make this easier to talk about lowers walls. The question hands control back, and with it, dignity. Even self-discipline works this way. Telling yourself you must change sparks rebellion. Asking what would make this easier today shifts the brain into problem solving. Questions move people from resistance to reasoning without confrontation. They create the illusion of choice while guiding direction. This is not manipulation. It is respect for how autonomy works. People defend decisions they believe they chose. Statements threaten identity. Questions preserve it. That is why interrogations fail and coaching succeeds. When you ask instead of tell, you are not giving up power, you are relocating it. You are letting the other person cross the line themselves. This feels slower, but it is cleaner. Less friction, less backlash, more follow-through. Influence that lasts rarely announces itself. It waits, listens, and then nudges with precision. Once you see this, you stop trying to convince and start designing conversations that unfold in your favor. The urge to explain fades because you realize explanation was never the lever. The lever was always self-persuasion, and that realization sets up the final principle, because even the best questions fail if action still feels heavy. Momentum dies when effort rises. Comment the last time you lost someone by pushing too hard. Law 7. Even agreement fails when action feels heavy. Questions may open the door, but the final reason persuasion fails is surprisingly simple. Action still feels heavy. You motivate, you inspire, you explain the benefits, and nothing happens. People nod, agree, even thank you, then return to the same behavior the next day. That disconnect is frustrating because it makes effort feel pointless. The Machiavellian truth is blunt. People are not lazy, they are energy efficient. They do not resist change, they resist effort. When thinking feels costly, they choose the path of least resistance, even if it contradicts their stated values. This is why motivation fades so fast. Motivation asks people to fight themselves. Design lets them drift forward instead. Look at habits. Telling yourself to wake up earlier rarely works. Moving the phone away from the bed changes behavior overnight. Look at decisions. Asking people to remember to donate produces weak results. Setting a default option multiplies participation without persuasion. Look at repeated actions at work. A team ignores a new process until the old shortcut is removed. Suddenly, compliance appears without arguments. Behavior follows the easiest exit available. That is the real lever. Influence that depends on willpower is fragile. Influence that removes friction is durable. This is why arguing about beliefs often fails while small environmental tweaks succeed. When action is easy, beliefs quietly follow. When action is hard, beliefs harden in defense. People do not wake up wanting to resist you. They wake up wanting to conserve energy and avoid discomfort. If your request demands extra steps, extra thought, or extra risk, it will stall. If it fits naturally into what already exists, it moves. This is not manipulation. It is alignment with human nature. Power at this level does not convince, it redirects. It changes the slope so movement feels natural. Once you see this, persuasion stops feeling personal. You stop blaming yourself for not being charismatic enough and stop blaming others for being stubborn. You focus on exits. Where does this action flow easily, and where does it get stuck? Change the pathway and behavior follows, without speeches, pressure, or repeated reminders. This principle explains why some leaders seem effortless. They are not better motivators, they are better designers. And that brings everything together. Silence sets rhythm. Reasons reduce fear. Groups provide safety. Hope restores movement. Simple language spreads ideas. See, questions preserve autonomy. And ease turns intention into action. The last step now is seeing how all of this fits into a single frame, because persuasion is not a bag of tricks. It is a way of seeing how power actually moves. By now the pattern should feel clear. Persuasion was never about volume, brilliance, or winning debates. You do not need to speak louder, argue longer, or dominate conversations to move people. In fact, every time you try to force agreement, you weaken your position. Real influence works in the opposite direction. It lowers friction, removes threat, and lets people arrive at action without feeling cornered. This is the Machiavellian truth most people miss. Power does not shout. It arranges. Silence sets rhythm so others reveal themselves. Reasons reduce fear so action feels safe. Groups create cover so no one feels alone. Truth paired with direction restores momentum instead of shame. Simple language allows ideas to travel without distortion. Questions protect autonomy while guiding choice. And ease turns intention into behavior without speeches or pressure. None of this requires manipulation, cruelty, or ego. It requires clarity, seeing human nature as it is, not as you wish it were. When people move on their own, you have already won. That is why the most influential figures often feel calm, understated, even boring on the surface. They are not chasing control. They are designing environments where resistance never forms. This is also why smart, well-meaning people feel exhausted trying to convince others. They fight uphill against instincts instead of shaping the slope. Once you stop pushing, conversations change. Meetings feel lighter. Relationships feel less tense. Results start appearing without constant effort. Influence stops feeling personal because it was never about you. It was about structure. This perspective is uncomfortable because it removes comforting myths about fairness and merit. But it gives something better in return: leverage. Not dominance over people, but alignment with how decisions actually happen. If you are done burning energy trying to win arguments, comment "I stop pushing." And if you want to keep learning how influence really works in the real world, not how it is romanticized, subscribe and stay close.